thanks. In Jesus' name, amen.
Great to see so many great things happen in this service. Or even like a couple weeks ago, I guess it's been a month or so, when we had also some baby dedications. I look at those kids and things like Facebook, when memories pop up on there, it makes you think about your own kids, right? It makes you think about when they were younger. Brennan is now 13, celebrated a birthday just a couple weeks ago. Allie is 9, going on 30, and it's you look at all those different things, and you think about what life was like at the different phases. And kids go through different phases, right? All kids kind of go through certain phases. Now, some kids go through different phases than other kids, and some kids go through certain phases at other times than other kids do. But there's always like those phases it seems like every kid goes through at some point. Like the phase of like putting everything in my mouth phase, right? You're constantly like, stop, don't put that in your mouth. I don't know where it's been or whatever. Or the taking off all of my clothes phase and just running around everywhere with no clothes on. Or the screaming phase. Or the drooling phase. Our kids went through the, as soon as I strap you into your car seat, you're going to take off your shoes and who knows where they're going to go phase. And those are mostly like young kid phases when they're real little, but then they kind of get a little bit older and they start to talk and they come into a whole brand new phase that lasts for really a long time, and that is the why phase, where they ask why about everything. That wonderful, unavoidable phase where the question is why for every little thing. And even when you're explaining the why to them, they're then asking you why about the things that you're explaining to the question of why, and they want to know why. And it's just like this endless circle, it seems like. And you have to kind of decide, okay, am I really going to give you the real answer to what you're asking? Why? Why is it this way or that? Or am I just going to give you the typical parent answer of either because I said so or because God made it that way? Like, why is the sky blue? Am I going to explain to you that there are tiny particles in the air that reflect the certain spectrum? Or am I just going to say, God just made it that way? Or why is the sun so bright? Why are Brussels sprouts so disgusting? They're always going to taste like dirt, or just whatever it might be. Why? And they ask all these different questions. And I think it's kind of interesting because when kids ask why, I don't really think that they're truly wanting to know the deep, kind of real answer behind it all. Because I think in some ways, if we do explain why to some of these kids, why things are a certain way, why things happen a certain way, why it has to be this way, I think in some ways they probably won't fully grasp what it is, and it may not even really help them. I had one friend who said that at one point in time with his kids, that he decided that he was going to give the full explanation anytime they ask why, in hopes that it would just kind of, make them just like lose interest and go off. Well, I don't think it really worked. And I think really, though, sometimes when kids ask why, I think in some ways it's an opportunity, not so much that they're asking for the answer or the reason, it's just another way to argue. Well, why not? Why can't I? Why does it have to be this way? But the thing is that, we give kids a hard time for asking why. And again, I say that sometimes I think when kids ask why, they really aren't asking why. It's just another way to argue. But the thing is, I think even you and I, we can be the same way. We ask why all the time in our own lives. Even as adults, we ask why. Why did my cable company raise my rate again? Why is there a bridge lift at rush hour over on the James River Bridge? Why do my neighbors feel the need to play their music as loud as possible at 10 o'clock at night right outside my own kid's bedroom? True story. We ask all these different things all the time. We ask questions all the time. And we give kids a hard time of asking questions why, and we say, well, you don't really want to know the real answer. But I think the same could be true about us. I really don't want to know the reason why my cable company raised my rates. I'm just mad about it, and I want to ask the question why. But I think the thing is that the same can be true even in our relationship with God. I think we've asked God questions of why so many times. Now, maybe sometimes it starts out with simple things, right? In a few months, actually, it's already started. We're going to ask God, why did you create mosquitoes and gnats? We were out at a soccer game yesterday, sitting out in the field, and just the bugs everywhere. Or we're asking things like, why is the winter so cold? Or why is the summer so hot? But chances are you've probably even asked God why about even some bigger things. God, why did I get fired from that job? God, why did I get that diagnosis? God, why did that person walk out on me or hurt me in that way? There are so many times that we ask God why. And even if we don't verbalize that literal specific question, I think in our heart we are asking him why. But not only that, and remember how we said about the kids, sometimes that they're, asking why is just an opportunity for them to argue the reason why it's happening. I think we do that with God too. I think sometimes we look for it as an opportunity to argue back with God about how life is going. Well, that's why we're starting today this new series called Tested. We're going to be looking at what it's like in our life to go through hardships and pain, because we've all gone through them. At some point in our life, we've all faced hardships, we've all faced pain, and the sad and sobering truth is that we are at some point in our life are going to go through more of those. And I would say that if you've studied the Bible very much in your life at all, or maybe just a little bit, my guess is that the passage that we're going to look at today, you've probably heard referred to or even taught on. We're going to be in James chapter 1. If you want to turn your Bibles, you can go there, or you can follow along on our screen in a minute. But the passage we're going to read today, the passage that we're going to study today, I think in many ways can be a really tough pill to swallow, especially for ourselves. And what I mean is that a lot of times the advice that we're going to read, it might be something that we're willing to tell other people, we might be willing to share with other people, but when it comes to ourselves, sometimes it's difficult for us to accept this teaching and really kind of take it personally. And so we see this in James chapter 1 and verse 2. It says this. James says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Well, here we have James. This is actually the brother of Jesus, and he's giving us some advice here. And he's speaking to us, and I got to say, actually, as an aside, that if you're looking for a good Bible, a good book of the Bible to read, to study, maybe you've not gotten into maybe you've gotten into reading different books of the Bible, James is a great place to start. There's a lot of very practical, short sections, very applicable things. He doesn't get into kind of deep theology like Paul does many times. He gets very applicable. But here, James is actually writing to just kind of Christians in general. And he starts out by talking about trials and hardships and difficulties. In fact, did you kind of catch what he didn't say about those trials and difficulties? He didn't ever say, if you face trials, but James right away tells Christians from the get-go, he says, whenever you face trials of many kinds. You see, hardships are a part of life. Now we don't like this. We don't like the fact that they're a part of life. We do our best to avoid hardships and struggles and trials. But when we are real and honest with ourselves, we know this is true. I mean, even Jesus himself faced difficulties, faced hardships and trials. We read in Hebrews 4:15, it says, "For we do not have a high priest," this is referring to Jesus figuratively, "we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin." You see, Jesus went through hardships. He had family members and friends die. He faced temptations of all kinds. He even went through dangerous, life-threatening moments, even things like being out on a boat in the middle of a storm. And so Jesus knew what it was like. He knows what it's like. And he would probably say to us, look, hardships are a part of life. And when we see that hardships are a part of life, we need to recognize, though, that this doesn't necessarily mean that God makes all these hardships happen in our life. We looked at this a little bit last week when we were talking about Jesus and how we could trust him. because he has done what he has said. He's kept his promises. But we hear this a lot. People will say things like, well, I'm not sure why God has sent this my way, or I'm not sure why God is doing this to me, or I'm not sure what God is trying to teach me in this way. And I think sometimes we do this because we're grasping for hope, we're grasping for answers, we're grasping for reasons, and maybe God's not right there in front of us to kind of fight back in that way. But maybe we'll say even things, and we talked about this again last week, of this idea that, well, God must be sending these hardships this way in my life so that I can also enjoy the good things in my life. Because, if you can't have the good things without the bad things. And again, that's not the case. I pointed out that last week we probably would all be enjoying Easter meals on Sunday after the service, and you probably did that. And again, no one had to go and eat a bad meal to enjoy the good meal. No one has to go and watch a bad movie to enjoy a good movie. But more importantly, not only does that not make sense logically, more importantly, you just can't support that idea scripturally that we have to have all these bad things that God puts in our life so we can enjoy the good things. But what we can support scripturally, we see in Romans chapter 8, where Paul writes and he says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. You see, God is working in the midst of even the hardships in our life for good. And while God did not cause that tumor, while God did not cause that car accident, while God did not cause you to lose your job, your marriage to fall apart, for you to get cut from the team, for you to fail that class, God can work within the midst of that pain. And friends, joy can come from the struggle. Again, we saw that in verse 2 where James tells us, he says, consider it pure joy. And this can be really difficult because James didn't say, look, it's not that bad, or it's not going to last forever. No, he says that we should consider it joy. And I would say, it's not really our response typically, right? When we go through difficulties, when things are frustrating, when things are hard, when there's pain in our life, when there's loss, we don't find pure joy quite often in it. Instead, we complain, we gripe, we fight, we flight, we question, we doubt. But here, James is telling us, friends, we can find joy. It won't be easy, and maybe we won't always be happy and comfortable in the midst of it, but we can choose joy. In fact, we saw a couple weeks ago when we were doing our series of the portraits of Jesus, we looked at Jesus' joy one week, and we saw how Jesus chose joy even in the midst of pain. We see this in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2. The writer talks about Jesus choosing joy. It says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Jesus chose joy. But too many times, we as Christians, we want to ignore this. We want to ignore this idea that we can choose joy even in the midst of trials and pain and hardship and difficulty. You see, joy is not necessarily in the difficulty, but joy is what will come as God brings us through the difficulty. Oh, but Joe, you don't understand. You're not in my shoes. You haven't gone through my experiences. Well, you're right. I'm not in your shoes. I have not experienced your life. I've not gone through the situations you've gone through. But you have to recognize that doesn't mean that I haven't gone through my own share of pain, my own struggles, my own hardships. And that also doesn't mean that there aren't countless others around us in our life every single day who go through struggles and hardships and pain and choose joy. Many of you know our friends John and Amy Moore. They are, I'm going to still say they're members of this church in many ways. This is their family there. John and Amy are in the middle, and that's their two boys and their daughters there. John and Amy Moore, they live in just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. They used to be members here, but they had to move out there to take care of John's daughters because of a family situation. And so it's probably been 4 or 5 years since they've moved out there. But John has got an incredible story, and you can probably see John is missing a leg there. John is a wounded veteran, and John, a few years back, wrote a letter about the day that he had his injury, and I want to read you this letter. This is a really powerful letter that he wrote. It says, on January 6, 2009, is the day I won't ever forget. That day my life changed forever. The day my life almost ended. I remember like it was yesterday. I can still remember the smell of the scent of the blast of the IED we ran over. I remember the look of worry and question on my soldiers' faces. I remember looking at our medic, wondering how I was going to crawl the 6 to 8 feet that I had to crawl because they couldn't get a stretcher through the back door of my Stryker vehicle to get to me. Once I was finally onto the stretcher, I remember freezing. I remember my teeth chattering so hard that I thought they were going to break off. I remember the guys running to me to the helicopter and one of them falling in a hole and someone scooping right in his place and never missing a beat. I remember my legs tingling like they were asleep and my feet throbbing so hard that I thought that they were going to explode out of my boots. I remember begging our medic to cut my boots off of my feet and him starting to do so and then stopping. I remember losing a significant amount of blood and going directly into emergency surgery. I remember waking up from surgery and my commander pinning my Purple Heart to my pillow. I remember having surgery every other day for a month and a half. I remember taking my first steps again. I remember 5 months later going into septic shock and the doctor telling me the next day that he was surprised to see me because he didn't think I was going to make it through the night. I remember waking up from surgery after amputating my leg and smiling because of the instant relief of pain. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and looking at the outline of my legs in the sheets of my bed and seeing one of them half as long as the other and asking God, why did this happen to me? It was the only time that I've ever asked that question. Do you know what his answer was? Because you were just that guy that day. But God wasn't done with me yet. Sitting here reflecting on what had happened 14 years ago, I had no clue what he had in store for me. I am blessed beyond belief. I have always been told that there is something special about me. I don't think I really understood until a few years ago when Amy and I started walking with Christ. For some reason, I find it extremely easy to talk to people, and I think God uses me in that way. He has brought me through so much, and I have no problem talking to anybody about anything in my life. And eventually, our conversation will always circle back around to what he has done for me, and I can't help but think it will stick with them and hopefully plant a seed in their hearts that will grow into a relationship with God. I am so thankful for what happened to me 14 years ago. I wouldn't change a thing. I have a beautiful wife. I have a wonderful family that loves Jesus. I couldn't be happier. And I read stories like that of people who say, I would do it all over again. Every bit of pain, every bit of hardship, every bit of loss, because God has brought me through. And there are so many other people who choose not to be fake and not pretend like, oh, everything's wonderful and perfect and pain-free, but choose joy in the midst of hardships in life. James even kind of points out and he tells us that the trials and the hardships, that they can produce something in us, that they can do something in our life. And the thing is that you and I, we need to look for God's work. We need to look for what he is doing. You remember earlier how I mentioned that, we have no problem asking why, right? But oftentimes we really aren't looking for God's answers. I think many times we aren't looking for those things. Many times maybe we hear someone else asking for why. Instead, we should be looking for what God is doing, how he is working, how he can use that pain, how he can use those trials for him. In fact, in a couple weeks, we're going to look at that specifically of what God can do with our stories, what God can do with our pain that we go through, and how he can actually use it for his glory and even to bless someone else. We need to be people that trust God and know that he is going to do something with our life, even when it's hard. I think a great example in the Bible is the Apostle Paul. Paul was a guy that at one point in his life was arrested for his preaching, for his faith, the way that he wanted to tell people about Jesus. And he is going to go on trial, but that as a Roman citizen, he appeals to Caesar. So that means he gets to go and appear before Caesar himself. And so they stick him on a boat, they send him off to Rome, and he gets shipwrecked because of this terrible storm. People think they're going to die, and he's trying to encourage them. They get shipwrecked onto a beach, and after that, he is then taken and put under house arrest. This guy's gone through some terrible things, but he says this in Philippians 1, writing to this church in Philippi to try and encourage them. Verse 12, he says, "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. Because of my chains, most of my brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear." You see, Paul is working hard to find God's work even in the midst of hardship and how God could use it. Or I think of a wonderful example like Joseph in the Old Testament. The end of the book of Genesis, we read about Joseph's life. Joseph was loved by his father and blessed especially by God in a special way, so much so that Joseph's brothers hated him for it. They wanted to kill him, but one of his brothers kind of stood up for him and said, "Let's just sell him." So they sell him off into slavery, and he's taken off to a foreign land, put into service of a royal official. And this royal official's wife is making advances on him, and he is kind of saying, "No, thank you." And she gets upset, gets him thrown into prison for something he didn't even do, spends a long time in there, eventually comes across and becomes friends with the cupbearer of the king and interprets a dream for this cupbearer because of God's gift for him. And the cupbearer says, "Hey, I won't forget what you've done for me." And years and years and years go by. Finally, the cupbearer remembers Joseph, and Joseph comes and interprets a dream for the king. The king realizes that there's going to be a famine and tells Joseph, "I want you to be in charge of preparing our people and really the whole area for this famine." And eventually Joseph's family has to come and ask for help and buy food. And they come to Joseph, but they don't realize it's him. And you may remember what happens there once they finally realize, or once he finally reveals himself to his brothers, they're terrified. They're like, "Oh man, what we did to this guy, and now he's in charge." And he could have taken all of his aggression, all of his hurt and pain out on his brothers. But we see this in Genesis 50 in verse 20. Joseph says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Trying to kill their brother, but eventually God uses that to save nations. And he could have punished those guys. He could have taken it out of them, but he was seeing God's work, God's purposes, God's plans. Next week, we're going to look at how we can surrender to God's plans and trust him. But then James kind of reminds us about one more thing about our suffering and our struggles. In fact, I want to go back and read it again in James 1 and verse 4. James says, "Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." I think what he's trying to encourage us to do, friends, is to embrace the moment. As hard as that may be, to embrace the moment. Maybe if you're in the military, you know this phrase better as not embrace the moment, but embrace the suck. When things get hard, when things get difficult, when opposition is coming your way, it's not about just standing strong, it's about standing long. And we stand in our faith in that way. When the enemy throws something your way, we stand back and we say, is that all you got? Is that all you have for me? James says, if you hold on through those hard times and you make it to the other side, when God brings you to that other side of that hardship and that pain, he says you will be mature and complete and not lacking anything. When he gets us to the other side, we can look back and we can see how God brings us through the hardship, the pain, the blood, sweat, and tears, bringing us through those moments. Church father or church theologian Charles Spurgeon once said this. He said, "I have looked back at times of trial with a kind of longing, not to have them return, but to feel the strength of God as I felt it then, to feel the power of faith as I felt it then, to hang upon God's powerful arm as I hung upon it then, and to see God at work as I saw him then." You see, Spurgeon understood the power of these moments. And you've probably experienced those moments where you're going through hardship and it feels like all you could do is just hold on to God, and you feel yourself pulling closer and closer to God. And you're clinging to Jesus like maybe never before. But maybe there are other times in your life that things were good and you almost kind of felt like you didn't need God, and you felt like you were letting go of him and just trying to stand on your own feet, and you felt very distant. Well, friends, in those times when we feel distant for God for those reasons, it's not because he moved, it's because we stepped away from him. But the closer that we cling to God in those moments of hardship and trial, I think the more that he'll pull us in and he'll hold us close even when things are good and easy. It's kind of like what Paul says in Romans 8:18. He says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's difficult. But what God can do with us through those times and then on the other side is beautiful. And Paul says it's not even worth comparing to what God's got in store for us next. Or in 2 Corinthians 4:17, he says, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, and this is key, I think, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Friends, we need to fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. You see, I think sometimes what happens in these situations, in these moments of pain and struggle and trial and hardship, is that we fix our eyes on the things that are seen, on the things that are right in front of us, the situation, the trouble, the issue, the person, whatever it might be. Sometimes even when we're the ones that are causing the pain, we focus on those things, on the things that are external, the things that are tangible. And so we're constantly then left asking that question of why and why and why, because we're constantly fixing our eyes on all the hardship and all the pain around us. But what Paul is encouraging us to do here instead is to fix our eyes on Jesus. Fix our eyes on Jesus. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by getting into his word and reading the Bible and filling our minds with his words and being reminded of his faithfulness to his people for generations and generations. We do that by spending time in prayer and focusing our heart and our mind on him and giving him the space and the quiet to work on us. We do that by spending time with his people like you do here on Sunday mornings or within life groups and sitting shoulder to shoulder and knee with people and sharing these hardships together. We do it by serving other people. And when we do that, we take our eyes off ourselves and we put our eyes on other people and the ways that we can serve. Friends, we know that it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when hardships and pain are going to come in our life. But if we would fix our eyes on Jesus, and if we would learn to trust him and give him the space to work even in the midst of those hardships and those hard times, I know, because I've seen it over and over in God's word, and I've seen it over and over in other people's lives, and I've seen it over and over in my own life, that if we would trust in him in these moments as we step through those hardships, that he will bring us through to the other side in a powerful way. And so when you're hurting, fix your eyes on Jesus. When you're confused, you fix your eyes on Jesus. When you're mad, you fix your eyes on Jesus. When you're depressed, you fix your eyes on Jesus. When you've failed as a parent, you fix your eyes on Jesus. When you've failed as a son or a daughter, you fix your eyes on Jesus. When you doubt, you fix your eyes on Jesus. When you fear, you fix your eyes on Jesus. Friends, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus. Allow him to bring us through these hardships to that other side. Let me pray for us. Lord, we are so grateful for your faithfulness. And we know that it can be easy at times to be excited about life, and it can be easy at times to jump up and down about your goodness. And God, we know of the difficulty that it is sometimes in the face of hardships, in the face of struggles and pain, to keep on fixing our eyes on you. So God, I pray right now, I want us to just, maybe in this moment, maybe there are some people right now that feel that deep within them that they are struggling to keep their eyes on you. And if that is the case, Lord, I pray right now that you would speak to them very plainly and very clearly, that they can trust you. Lord, maybe there are people here who have been struggling for a while and feel like it's never going to end. God, we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know the time that you are going to bless us and bring us to the other side. But Lord, I pray that those people right now, that you would renew and refresh that endurance, that perseverance that they need to trust in you. And God, I pray that every one of us, that we would be reminded that if we're not going through hardships right now, that there are people around us who are. And we need to see those, and we need to be the strength and the encouragement that maybe someone else needs. We need to be the shoulder for someone to lean on. We need to be the arm to pick someone else up. We need to be the strength that people need around us. And if we are going through a hardship, God, maybe even in the midst of that hardship, we need to see other people's pain as well. Whatever it is, God, Lord, I pray that you would help us not to miss what you're doing and not to miss the great work that you could do within our heart and our life, Lord. So God, come, strengthen us, encourage us, lift us up for your glory so that we can follow after you, even when it's difficult.